hat people are doing. So this right here, this is the comparison of the Ultras. Now here's the deal, even though they both have Ultra in their names, they're drastically different. Like, there's no two ways about it. I say that because quite simply the S25 Ultra is about as generic as it can get. Is that a bad thing? Potentially, maybe not entirely, but it's not that exciting of a device. That's the best way to put it. Just look at these two phones side by side. Do you see one of these as more enticing than the other, more of an Ultra than the other? I'd say that the Xiaomi 15 Ultra is the one right there. And that is very true for the cameras as well. The S25 Ultra's cameras feel significantly more bare bones in terms of just the features that you can have. Now, is it a bad camera? Not by a long shot, but is the Xiaomi 15 Ultra more exciting? Hell yeah. But is that enough for it to pull ahead? Well, that's exactly what we're gonna find out. Alright, then as per usual, we have the color profiles. So on the Xiaomi, you have Leica Vibrant, which I think is gonna be the one that most people might end up using, especially those who just want a good, consistent color profile, one that has very good dynamic range. As you can probably tell, it's even better than the S25 Ultra, by the way, which is quite a big deal. It's got really nice, vibrant, punchy colors, got a fairly nice amount of contrast, not particularly high for a very good reason. But yeah, I think Leica Vibrant is a fantastic color profile that is suitable for a lot of people, no doubt. But my personal favorite, without a doubt, is gonna be Leica Authentic, right? Because at the end of the day, despite how nice and how consistent, how much more consistent Leica Vibrant can have a tendency to be, the look and the style of Leica Authentic is unparalleled. There's no two ways about it. Now on the S25 Ultra, you might be noticing that it looks fairly high contrast, fairly natural in terms of the saturation. The S25 Ultra actually gives you custom color profiles. Now you can customize it a lot. I did do the same for myself, just increase the contrast, lower the saturation. That's kind of the best way I like it from the S25 Ultra. But because Leica Authentic is built from the ground up with high contrast and style in mind, its processing is far more tuned as opposed to anything you can do with the S25 Ultra. Now I know there exists this one color profile which you can download on the S25 Ultra that can get you kind of close to Leica Authentic that you can get from the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. But, well, I haven't really tried that yet. What I can tell you is that the Xiaomi 15 Ultra's Leica Authentic is, without a doubt, one of my all-time favorites. Now I know for a fact not everyone's going to agree with me on this, and that's completely fine, but you're never gonna change my mind. That's a bloody fact. But what I can tell you is this, because of the approach that the Xiaomi 15 Ultra takes, not just high contrast and high clarity in the mid-tone details and so on, that really brings out the natural details in the shot, which you can tell probably across the board with all these images. But it's also the fact that you don't really have a lot of sharpening happening in the shot. This approach is fantastic. It allows for natural detail, but doesn't allow the image to be particularly overprocessed, at least on most of the time. And you know what, far as I can tell, across the board from both the main camera and the ultrawide, I do think that the dynamic range processing has improved slightly as opposed to what we used to have with the Xiaomi 14 Ultra. The Xiaomi 14 Ultra was good, just to be very clear, but the way the contrast, the exposure, the highlights are balanced out, it works out really well. The HDR processing has definitely improved just enough so that it still maintains a natural, almost DSLR-esque photography look, but it doesn't look completely blown out with the highlights or crushed with the shadows. Having said that though, I do still believe that the S25 Ultra, because of the way it processes images, because of the way it tends to handle its highlights and the HDR in general, it will end up with slightly better dynamic range, slightly better HDR processing, especially as you can probably tell in some of these shots. But of course, that's only a small part of the cake, because as you can probably tell, the macro photography side of the things, it's different on both. The approach is very different. So on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, you have what I like to think of as slightly better than mediocre macro photography. It's a mouthful, but what I'm trying to say is that we get telephoto macro, which is great. That's huge. It's fantastic. It's exactly the way it should be. But then on the other hand, you can't really get as close to the subject. Maybe it's because telephoto macros in general are just limited in that nature, but at the end you can't really get as close. And so you're left with this result, and that's the best you can get. The S25 Ultra on the other hand, yes, it can get closer, but the overall quality is significantly worse for two reasons. First and foremost, you can get closer physically because you're using the ultra-wide camera, but because of that, you end up blocking a lot of the light in various situations. You can literally see the shadow of the phone right there. But more than that, the overall quality of the shot itself is lower. I'm guessing because we're using the ultra-wide camera. That's usually how it goes. So honestly, with the pros and cons that both offer, I have no idea which one I prefer. Being completely honest here, I'm just gonna leave this up to you guys, and whichever approach you like more on the macro side of things, well then just go for that. But as usual, we will be moving on to zoom. Now here we're starting off with the sensor crop, and once again I do want to point out I did increase the contrast on the S25 Ultra, but take a look at how the image is being balanced on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. It has a lot of contrast, but the exposure is balanced so well because once again this color profile is built with high contrast in mind from the ground up. That fundamental concept is why the Xiaomi looks so much nicer, so much more pleasing, so much better in this case. And speaking of better, cropping all the way in, and yeah, the S25 Ultra doesn't even hold a candle as opposed to the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. That's quite something. Now, I didn't really expect it to be this bad though. Like I kind of remember the S25 Ultra not being particularly bad when it comes to the 2x sensor crop, but the Xiaomi is leagues ahead. There's no two ways about it. Now when it comes to 3x, the approach is very, very different on both these phones because essentially you have the Xiaomi, which has a fairly good 3x. It's not perfect, but it's not all that bad. The S25 Ultra has possibly one of the worst 3x cameras. It's not good, and it is in dire need of an upgrade. And as you can probably tell, when we crop all the way into 500%, yes, the Xiaomi 15 Ultra could use a touch more sharpening to really bring out the details without looking particularly overprocessed. But the S25 Ultra, look at the sheer amount of processing. I don't know how much of this you can see on YouTube after everything is said and done, but what I can tell you is that it is significantly, and I mean significantly, more sharpened. I mean, it's pretty bad compared to the Xiaomi. Then of course we have 5x on the S25, which is actually a really good periscope camera, which again makes me wonder why in all hell combined are they not upgrading that damn 3x? It is pathetic, as you probably saw. Now on the Xiaomi, things are very interesting because we don't have a 5x anymore. What we have is a 200 megapixel brand new 4.3x periscope zoom. And well, I have very, very mixed opinions regarding this particular sensor because when we crop in, as you can probably tell, the quality with 12 megapixel mode, it's beyond stellar. This is exceptional. This is easily one of the highest quality 12 megapixel periscope zoom shots that I've seen. You see, I'm emphasizing that for a very good reason. You'll see very soon exactly why I say that. Now moving on to high res, so here's the deal. Both phones have very unique approaches when it comes to the 200 megapixel mode on both. So on the S25 Ultra, this is a bin down 50 megapixel mode, and when we crop in, as you can probably tell, both phones are very, very close. The S25 definitely has a bit more sharpening and also a bit more artifacting, but the Xiaomi, as usual, it goes for the opposite approach. It has good detail, there's no doubt about that, but the S25's real strength lies in its 200 megapixel mode. And believe me when I tell you, this was not the case before, because prior to the S25 Ultra, far as I can remember, every single device previously had a lot of problems, and I mean a whole lot of problems when it came to the 200 megapixel mode and just being able to preserve proper details. By some miracle, the S25 Ultra's 200 megapixel mode actually produces genuine and significant levels of detail. I'm telling you, this wasn't even in the best possible lighting, and it's like miles, leagues ahead of the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. It's not even a comparison at this point. That's pretty massive, and that is a huge upgrade that it's honestly just overlooked at this point because most people just diminish the S25 Ultra's overall existence because there's not much on paper when it comes to upgrades, but optimizations play a significant role, and this is proof of that. And now the ultra-wide camera, I think this is the star of the show when it comes to the S25 Ultra because yes, it might be a bit of a boring looking phone, but it has a lot to offer when it comes to overall quality, especially with this brand new ultra-wide. It is such a breath of fresh air. No two ways about it. And cropping into 500% as usual, I think it speaks for itself. Both phones, believe it or not, are using 50 megapixel mode, but only one of them looks like they're actually using 50 megapixels right there because the S25 Ultra, worthy of so much praise right there. It is quite something, isn't it? Now with the 3x, we're gonna get through this quick because the 3x is not all that good on the S25, and well, cropping into 500%, it kind of speaks for itself. Now yes, I would say compared to a 50 megapixel shot, it's not doing particularly bad considering it only has 10 megapixels, but the amount of noise, the amount of sharpening, the grain, the artifacting, the sharpening, all that jazz, it kind of just ruins it. At least for me, it does. Because I think what we need at the very bare minimum is the quality we get from the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. That should be standard. But But that's not really the case on the S25, now is it? Now let's move on to another particularly interesting subject over here. Previously, we saw that the S25 Ultra's 200 megapixel mode with the main camera, it can produce genuine results. It can produce some beautiful results. Well, initially at least, I can tell you without a doubt that the 50 megapixel mode is definitely better than the S25 Ultra. Now, we still get no sharpening on the Xiaomi, which is, I guess, a good thing for most people. And neither do we get any sharpening on the S25 Ultra, which is very odd. That's not something I expected, but that's just the way it's going. But obviously, that's not why we're here. We are here to test out the 200 megapixels. The Xiaomi 15 Ultra's results are not good enough, not by a long shot, because it doesn't even look like it's really utilizing 200 megapixels. Like, we saw how good 200 megapixels can look on the S25 Ultra, and this is just not it. We also know how good 200 megapixels can be from the Vivo X200 Pro. If you're curious about that, I already made a comparison. The link to the playlist are in the description. But here's the deal. I think, without a shadow of doubt, the Xiaomi 15 Ultra needs significant amounts of optimization. I don't think it's a bad sensor, it's just that the optimization is not really tailored to genuinely take advantage of that 200 megapixel sensor on the periscope camera that we have here. At least that's my assumption here. Alright, now moving on to selfies. So here's the deal. I think that the Xiaomi 15 Ultra has had this shadow upgrade of sorts with the selfies, because it's actually gotten a lot better as opposed to the Xiaomi 14 Ultra. Xiaomi 14 was good, to be completely honest, but I don't think it was nearly as good and as consistent more than anything else with the exposure, the contrast, the overall skin tones as well. Now, you may also notice that the S25 Ultra can sometimes desaturate, while the Xiaomi 15 Ultra can sometimes oversaturate skin tones. That's kind of the tendencies that both these have. It's interesting that they both went for the opposing approaches, but well, that's just the way it is. But overall, if I had to pick one out of these two, I'd probably go for the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. For an unorthodox reasoning, it's that the Xiaomi has a wider field of view. I really prefer cameras that have wider field of views, so that's gonna be my pick. But honestly, you could be fine with either. It's not gonna be a problem. Both have really nice selfies. Hell, if anything at all, I would say that the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, in this particular case, with this portrait selfie, it actually has much better dynamic range. Just take a look at the highlight in the background, the sun. It's significantly more preserved. Now yes, there is a lot of lens flaring happening on both phones, but that highlight preservation is impressive, isn't it? Now moving on, of course, to rear camera portraits, which I think arguably, when it comes to human subjects in general, is going to be much more impactful when it comes to the overall camera's performance. At least that is my opinion, because I just really don't like taking selfies, personally speaking. But when it comes to these portraits, you see, the Xiaomi, just like almost every other previous generation that we have had, it has master portraits and Leica portraits. Now, master portraits, it's a safer option in my opinion, because you have a little bit more saturation, a little bit less contrast, and just an overall flatter, maybe a little bit more flattering of an approach. That could be one way to put it, I guess. But then on the other hand, we have the Leica portraits, which, in my opinion, work out tremendously well, because for me personally, as you can probably tell, I am a huge advocate of high contrast across the board, and Leica portraits provide exactly that. Slightly less saturation, but a lot of contrast. And sometimes, yes, it can be excessive, sometimes it can go over the board. The overall consistency, and my personal recommendation for most people, would actually be the S25 Ultra for portrait photography. The simple reason is that when it comes to human subjects, you really need a high level of perfection and a very high level of consistency, especially with skin tones, contrast, exposure, so on, to nail them. And that is something the S25 Ultra can provide. Yes, sometimes it will end up with slightly flatter portraits and slightly lower contrast, maybe lower saturation portraits, but most of the time, it's going to perform slightly better, slightly more consistently as opposed to the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. Is it perfect? No. Like in this particular case, you can tell that the Xiaomi is doing significantly better than the S25 Ultra, because the contrast balance, for me personally, it works so well on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. That high contrast, it's worth the sacrifice in consistency. So definitely choose exactly what it is that you want. In this case, I can only tell you my preference. Now finally, we have night mode, which is very interesting on both phones because of a variety of reasons. But first and foremost, on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, we don't actually get a night mode, believe it or not. This is just a regular photography mode that is taking long exposures. And that's all we have. It's very similar to how the iPhone does things, so it's not exactly new in this approach. It kind of helps in terms of, regular photography. You don't have to switch to a night mode constantly. But at the end of the day, I feel like I'm just very used to Android phones having night modes. And to have the Xiaomi 15 Ultra of all the bloody devices, the Xiaomi, to not have a night mode, a dedicated night mode, it makes me a little uneasy. But to be honest, I've not had any problems across the course of 2 different camera comparisons, 2 very challenging camera comparisons. I've not had a singular issue with the long exposure not kicking in, or me wanting a dedicated night mode. That's not really been the case. It's just that I'm a little uncomfortable, that's all. But the second very interesting fact here is that the S25 Ultra has improved significantly on its night mode. Not in the quality or anything, the quality was always fantastic, no two ways about it, but in the approach that it takes, in how natural the night mode can look on the S25 Ultra. It is a significant deal in my opinion, because the S25 Ultra's night mode is tremendous now. It is so much more natural. It is almost as natural as the Xiaomi 15 Ultras, and that's a big deal in my opinion. I think it just gets it so much closer to being genuinely useful at night, because it can maintain the darkness of night and it doesn't go for that overexposed look. That's a huge deal in my opinion, and it looks so much nicer for it. Now of course, with the situation that we have with the Xiaomi 15 Ultra not having a night mode, I would go so far as to say that an ultra low light situation is a requirement. So that's exactly what we have here. Don't be fooled. This is horribly dark. It looks particularly bright on both, I understand that, but it is horribly dark. Now well, cropping all the way in, it's pretty obvious that even though the S25 had more contrast and that kind of made it look like it had more detail, but in reality, you can probably see that the overall sharpness, the detail level is indeed higher on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. Do both of them have artifacting? Obviously, because it's an unrealistically low light situation. But overall, the Xiaomi is performing even better with less exposure. That's probably because the sensor is larger, higher quality as opposed to the S25, but well, it is performing better, and that's kind of all that matters, isn't it? It's a very similar situation with the ultra wide as well. I mean, just take a look at the night sky on the S25 Ultra. That is worthy of a bloody applause. It is so nice to look at. It is almost exactly, basically as dark as the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, and that is a huge deal. Hell, if anything at all, we actually have more detail in the brickwork on the S25 Ultra as well. And well, this is kind of the case across the board. Now, one thing that I have noticed is that, especially in the kind of lighting that I shot in with these particular shots, some of them were in really warm lighting, and I feel like the Xiaomi is kind of capturing the warmth basically perfectly. There's literally no issues, while sometimes the S25 can sort of over neutralize it. Although, I must say, the S25 Ultra definitively seems to have improved upon this neutralization of warmth problem that we had. It was much worse before, and across the course of this particular comparison, I've seen very little of that happen. It does appear that the last few updates that we have had, they've definitely improved upon this particular glaring issue that we had with the white balance, or the lack thereof of white balance, because it's much better now. As you can probably tell with a lot of these shots, the warmth is beautifully preserved on the S25. This used to not be the case. If you don't believe me, once again, the links to the comparisons for the S25 Ultra are in the description, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. It used to just neutralize everything to white, and that's not exactly what we want now, is it? Hell, if anything, in this particular case, I would say the S25 is significantly better balanced with the way it's handling the saturation of the blues and everything else. It's quite a feat, to say the least. Now finally, let us take a look at the zoom situation at night. So, first and foremost, the 2x sensor crop. And yes, the sky on the S25 looks really nice. It's better than the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, which is a miraculous feat, to say the least. But what is happening with the highlight in our subject? Let me zoom in. Once again, what in the absolute hell is happening with the highlight in the subject? Where is that even coming from? I have no idea. I don't know what's going on here. I mean, the Xiaomi, that's exactly how it looked. So I'm not sure what's happening on the S25 Ultra. I did take 3 images and all 3 of them had the same issue. Now I would say that overall detail preservation is kind of similar with a little bit less sharpening on the Xiaomi. Surprise, surprise. But when it comes to the 3x, I gotta say, this time the Xiaomi sky, now that's a nice looking sky. But let's zoom in and find out exactly if the details are any good. Well, yes, they absolutely are. I don't even think that the S25 is even using that 3x telephoto, because more than likely it's just cropping in and trying to optimize it with the main camera. That has happened before, and it definitely seems like the case here, because the processing is going way too overboard, and even then, it doesn't have nearly as much detail. And last but not least are periscope cameras. Once again, I think the sky is an absolute delight on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. But we are of course here for the details, so cropping in all the way, I would say that we have a little bit of smearing and motion blur on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, just a pinch. You can kind of see it in the highlights maybe, but the S25 looks like a train wreck. I expected a little bit better than that, to be completely honest, but well, I guess that is kind of expected given that the 12 megapixel shots previously were not all that good, and for some reason on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, the 4.3x 12 megapixel shots turn out exceptional, but that is not the case when it comes to the high resolution. Speaking of course, that brings us to the end of this comparison. I would say that overall, the Xiaomi 15 Ultra is tremendous, to say the least. Like, it definitely feels like more of an ultra device, more of a daring device, so to speak, when it comes to the features, the way it handles its images, and so on and so forth. I don't think it's for everybody though. I think that the approach that Leica Authentic takes, that Leica Portraits take, is meant for people who just prefer style over consistency. People who are like me, to say the least. This is exactly the kind of smartphone that I would want to use, and I can guarantee it's not going to be something that most people might want, because the lack of consistency can be a bit of an issue. Being very honest here. Even though I absolutely love it, I do know that the way Leica Authentic works, the way it has this insane vignette, which I personally love, once again, it is not going to be something that most people adore. And that's completely fine. I mean, that's exactly why Leica Vibrant exists, right? That's exactly what you want to use if you don't want the stylistic look of Leica Authentic. And I do like the fact that we have those options. Speaking of, the S25 Ultra. It has its fair share of issues. We definitely have had some genuine upgrades, especially with the white balance, because as you saw, we took a lot of warm lit shots, and it did not appear as if the S25 was going particularly crazy with the over neutralization of warmth, which is honestly such a nice upgrade. I say upgrade, but this was just a basic software update that fixed it, so I'm guessing this was like a bug in the software processing. That's the best guess that I have. But yeah, it's very nice to see that the S25 Ultra has finally taken care of a major issue. And well, with that said, I do hope you guys found this helpful. Had a good time, and I'll see you guys sooner with more. Cheers.